The Verax Dominion had conquered 17 star systems before they encountered Earth. Their crystalline ships, each a masterpiece of engineering that harnessed quantum mechanics in ways humans couldn't yet comprehend, emerged from fold space above Earth's atmosphere in perfect formation. Like massive geometric predators, they cast prismatic shadows over the planet's oceans. Supreme Commander Ixal observed the blue world through compound eyes that could process visual information 1,000 times faster than any human retina. Their preliminary scans had revealed a civilization that barely qualified as spacefaring. Primitive satellites cluttered low orbit, and a single pathetic outpost clung to the planet's moon. But it was the oceans that had drawn the Verax here, vast, deep, and teeming with resources they could harvest. Fascinating. Ixal's second-in-command, Zara, chittered. They've polluted their own waters, yet life persists. Such resilience in their ecosystem, despite their primitive nature. The Verax had evolved on a world of crystalline structures, where water existed only in precise, controlled quantities. The idea of massive bodies of liquid water both disgusted and intrigued them. Earth's oceans represented the largest reservoir of specific minerals they required for their quantum drives. Minerals that had become scarce in their conquered territories. Begin the extraction protocol, Ixal commanded. Standard procedure. No need to even acknowledge the natives. The first harvester descended through the atmosphere like a falling star, its crystalline structure refracting sunlight into rainbow cascades. It touched down in the Pacific Ocean, extending its collection arrays. The Verax expected no resistance. They had done this 17 times before, on worlds far more advanced than Earth. They were wrong. Within 20 minutes of the harvester's deployment, 3 human submarines approached it. Primitive vessels, according to Verax scanners, powered by nuclear fission and propelled by mechanical means. The Verax aboard the harvester didn't even bother raising shields. Their hull could withstand forces thousands of times greater than anything these vessels could generate. The submarines launched torpedoes. The Verax laughed, until the detonations came not from impact, but from precisely calculated distances around the harvester. The shock waves, amplified and focused by the water itself, created resonance patterns that shattered the harvester's crystalline structure like a wine glass destroyed by a perfect note. Aboard the command ship, Ixal watched in disbelief as the harvester crumbled into the ocean depths. Impossible, they chittered. They couldn't have known our structural vulnerabilities. But the humans hadn't known. They had simply tried everything they could think of, as quickly as they could think of it. While the Verax were still processing the failure of their first harvester, human nations around the world were already sharing data, analyzing the debris, and preparing for the next incursion. The Verax launched a second harvester, this time with shields raised. The humans responded with a combination of electromagnetic pulses and sonic weapons that they had hurriedly cobbled together from studying the wreckage of the first harvester. It wasn't elegant. Nothing humans did was elegant by Verax standards, but it was effective. They adapt too quickly, Zara observed, mandibles clicking in agitation. Each failure provides them with more data. Ixal's compound eyes shifted through spectrum ranges as they analyzed the situation. The humans were primitive, yes, but they fought with a desperate creativity that the Verax had never encountered. While the Verax relied on perfect execution of proven strategies, humans threw everything at the wall to see what would stick, then immediately refined whatever showed promise. When the third harvester fell to a combination of repurposed oil rig equipment and hastily modified depth charges, Ixal was forced to call an emergency council. The humans had not only destroyed 3 harvesters, but had done so without losing a single submarine. More concerning, Verax sensors detected increased activity in human military installations worldwide. They were preparing something. "We have miscalculated," Ixal announced to the council. These humans, they are not merely defending their territory. They are learning. Every engagement makes them more dangerous. Preposterous, Elder Vex chittered. They are primitive. Their technology is centuries behind ours. They have barely touched their own moon. As if in response to Vex's dismissal, alarms blared throughout the command ship. Human satellites, previously dismissed as primitive, had begun transmitting on frequencies that interfered with Varax sensor crystals. Simultaneously, submarines worldwide launched salvos of missiles, not at the Varax ships, but into carefully calculated points in the atmosphere. The resulting electromagnetic disturbances created patterns that the humans couldn't possibly have predicted would affect Varax technology. But they tried it anyway, and when it showed even slight promise, they immediately adjusted and amplified the effect. Full retreat. Ixal commanded, their decision instant and final. We cannot risk losing more harvesters. Over mere primitives. Vex protested. No, Ixal responded, watching as humans continued to launch missiles in evolving patterns, each more effective than the last. Over creatures who have turned their very primitiveness into a weapon. They don't need to understand why something works. They only need to see that it does, and they immediately build upon that knowledge. As the Varax fleet retreated into fold space, Ixal made a note in the Dominion's archives. Earth was to be marked not as a primitive world, but as an extreme hazard. These humans had demonstrated something far more dangerous than advanced technology. They had shown the ability to turn their enemies' strengths into weaknesses, to learn and adapt at terrifying speeds, and to coordinate globally against a common threat, despite their internal divisions. They weren't prey at all. They were something far more dangerous. Survivors who had learned to thrive in one of the universe's most chaotic environments. And they had just discovered they weren't alone in the cosmos. Ixal almost pitied the next species that would underestimate them. 6 months after the Varax's first attempt to harvest Earth's oceans, humanity had transformed. The brief encounter had given them something they'd never had before, proof they weren't alone, and evidence that they could stand their ground against advanced civilizations. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the newly established Extraterrestrial Defense Command Center, buried deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. Screens displayed a web of sensors that now encircled Earth, a detection network cobbled together from modified weather satellites, repurposed deep-sea monitoring equipment, and technology reverse-engineered from Varax debris. "They're coming back," she announced to the assembled military leaders. "The question isn't if, but when." The room didn't erupt in panic or fear. Instead, there was a focused intensity that had become characteristic of humanity since the first encounter. They had spent the last 6 months preparing, but not in the way the Varax might have expected. Project Echo is ready for deployment. Dr. James Patel, head of the new Xenotechnology Division, reported. He pulled up a hologram of what appeared to be simple crystalline structures. "We've successfully grown our own versions of their sensor crystals, not as sophisticated as theirs, but good enough for what we have planned." The crystals were humanity's first major breakthrough. They weren't trying to replicate Varax technology perfectly. They didn't have time for that. Instead, they focused on understanding just enough about how it worked to exploit its weaknesses. "How many decoys are ready?" Chen asked. 3,000, Paddle replied. Each one broadcasting false signatures that mimic their harvester resonance patterns. When they return, they won't be able to tell which signals are their actual ships and which are our decoys. This was humanity's response to finding themselves outgunned. They wouldn't try to match the Varax's technological superiority. Instead, they would turn the aliens' reliance on their advanced sensors against them. The strategy came to be tested sooner than expected. 3 weeks later, the sensors detected Varax ships emerging from fold space, not just a harvesting fleet this time, but a full battle group. Their crystalline ships had been modified, reinforced against the tactics humanity had used in the first encounter. But humanity wasn't fighting the last war. As soon as the Varax appeared, Operation Echo began. Thousands of small devices, each containing a primitive version of Varax sensor crystals, activated simultaneously. To the Varax's advanced sensors, it appeared as though they were suddenly surrounded by phantom ships, false readings, and impossible energy signatures. "Their fleet is splitting up," a tactical officer reported, watching as the Varax ships move to investigate the phantom signals. They're trying to locate the real threats among the decoys. Chen nodded. This was exactly what they had predicted. The Varax, with their rigid, hierarchical thinking, couldn't ignore potential threats. They had to investigate each signal methodically, spreading their forces thin. "Launch Phase 2, she ordered. Across Earth's oceans, submarines that had been waiting in the depths began broadcasting on frequencies that humans had discovered could interfere with Varax communications. Not enough to block them completely. That would have been impossible with human technology, but enough to introduce subtle distortions. The Varax ships began to move erratically, their perfect formation dissolving as conflicting sensor data and distorted communications forced them to operate independently. This was humanity's true weapon, chaos. While humans thrived in uncertain conditions, the Varax required order and precision. "They're trying to recalibrate their sensors," Patil observed, watching the energy signatures from the alien ships fluctuate. "But each time they adjust to filter out one type of interference, we switch to another pattern." The humans had learned that they couldn't overpower the Varax, but they could overwhelm them with complexity. Every time the aliens adapted to one form of interference, humanity introduced 3 more. They didn't need to understand exactly how Varax technology worked. They just needed to keep throwing new variables into the equation. The breaking point came when the humans activated the 3rd phase of their strategy. Underwater speakers, installed across the ocean floor, began broadcasting frequencies that created subtle vibrations in the crystalline structures of the Varax ships. Not enough to damage them directly, but enough to make their own sensor readings unreliable. "Their ships are beginning to withdraw," the tactical officer announced. "They can't distinguish real threats from false ones, and they can't trust their own sensor data." Chen watched as the mighty Varax fleet, which had arrived in perfect formation, retreated in disarray. They hadn't fired a single shot. They hadn't needed to. Humanity had turned the battlefield itself into a weapon, using the Varax's technological superiority against them. As the last alien ship disappeared into fold space, Dr. Patil turned to Admiral Chen. "They'll be back," he said, "and they'll have countermeasures for everything we just did." Chen nodded. "Of course they will. That's why we already have 3 new strategies in development. We don't need to be better than them. We just need to keep them off balance, keep changing the rules of engagement faster than they can adapt." The Admiral looked at the now empty tactical display. "They think in terms of perfection and mastery. We think in terms of adaptation and survival. And in the long run, survival always wins." The victory celebration was brief. Humanity knew this was just the beginning, but they had proven something crucial. Against an enemy that relied on precision and predictability, humanity's greatest weapon was its embrace of chaos and imperfection. They had learned to fight not by becoming stronger, but by making their enemy's strength irrelevant. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the Varax were beginning to understand that they had awakened something far more dangerous than they had imagined. A species that didn't just survive chaos, it weaponized it. The Varax High Command had never experienced failure, not until they encountered humans. Supreme Commander Ixal stood before the Council of Elders, their crystalline exoskeleton dulled with stress as they delivered the unthinkable news. The 3rd campaign against Earth had failed before it even began. "The humans," Ixal reported, "have seeded the entire approach to their solar system with automated defense platforms. But these aren't conventional weapons, they're psychological weapons." The council chamber, a perfect geodesic sphere of living crystal, resonated with murmurs of disbelief. The Varax had assumed that after their last defeat, humans would attempt to build bigger weapons, stronger shields, or faster ships. Instead, they had done something unprecedented. "Show us," Elder Vex commanded. Ixal activated a holographic display. It showed the lead ships of the Varax fleet approaching Earth's solar system, only to encounter clouds of small, primitive satellites. Each satellite broadcasted a continuous stream of human entertainment media: music, videos, stories, art, and games. But it wasn't the content that was the weapon, it was the chaos it represented. Our tactical systems are designed to analyze patterns and predict outcomes, Ixel explained. But human creativity follows no discernible pattern. Our prediction algorithms crash when exposed to their arts. Their music disrupts our crystalline computational matrices. Their stories. Ixel's mandibles clicked in distress. Their stories defy logical progression. The Verax had evolved in a world of perfect crystalline structures, where everything followed precise mathematical rules. Their technology, their society, even their thought processes were built on the foundation of predictable patterns. Human creativity was like a virus in their systems. 3 of our advanced scout ships suffered complete systems failures, Ixel continued. Their crews had to be evacuated. The ship's quantum cores had tried to process and predict the patterns in human music, something called jazz, and the randomness corrupted their base programming. Elder Vex rose from their crystalline throne. Surely we can simply destroy these primitive broadcasting devices. We tried, but the humans anticipated this. Each destroyed satellite releases thousands of smaller devices, all broadcasting different frequencies, different patterns, different chaos. It's like trying to filter an ocean one drop at a time. The council chamber darkened as Ixel played another recording. This time, it showed a Verax destroyer attempting to navigate through a cloud of human literature broadcasts. The ship's movements became erratic as its navigation systems tried to plot a course through what its computers perceived as an impossible space, a space where human stories created paradoxes and logical contradictions that the Verax systems couldn't resolve. They turned their greatest weakness into an impenetrable shield, Ixel concluded. Our technology requires order to function. Their minds thrive on disorder. We cannot defeat what we cannot comprehend. But the true breaking point came when the humans launched their counterattack. They had been studying the Verax, learning not just their technological weaknesses, but their psychological ones. The human fleet that emerged from Earth's shadow didn't try to match Verax technology. Instead, they had created ships that were deliberately asymmetrical, painted with chaotic patterns that disrupted Verax targeting systems. Their ships, a tactical officer reported, their voice vibrating with distress. They're playing music as they attack, each one broadcasting a different rhythm, a different melody. Our synchronization is failing. We cannot maintain formation. The Verax fleet, which had never lost a traditional battle in its 1,000-year history, began to break apart. Their perfectly coordinated battle strategies crumbled in the face of human unpredictability. Each human ship fought differently, used different tactics, created different patterns that the Verax couldn't analyze fast enough to counter. Fall back, Ixel commanded, watching as their mighty armada was driven into retreat by a technologically inferior force. Full withdrawal from the system. As the Verax fleet flooded into fold space, they left behind not just their pride, but their entire understanding of warfare. They had discovered that their greatest strength, their perfect, predictable, pattern-based technology, was also their greatest vulnerability. The humans hadn't needed to match their technological level. They had simply needed to understand it well enough to exploit its fundamental assumptions. In the aftermath, the Council of Elders gathered for an emergency session. For the first time in their history, they faced an enemy they couldn't defeat through superior technology or military might. The humans had done more than resist. They had forced the Verax to confront the limitations of their own evolution. "We must adapt," Elder Vex announced, the words feeling foreign in their mouth. To the Verax, adaptation had always meant perfecting existing patterns. But now they faced a species that thrived on breaking patterns, on constant change and chaos. As the Verax retreated to their crystalline worlds to redesign their entire approach to warfare, humanity celebrated not just their victory, but the validation of their entire species' way of being. Their primitive creativity, their chaotic thinking, their illogical approach to problems, these weren't weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths that had evolved precisely because they lived in an unpredictable universe. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Verax began to wonder if perhaps they had been the primitive ones all along, trapped in their perfect patterns while humanity danced freely through the chaos of creation. In the crystalline laboratories of the Verax homeworld, scientist Prime Kilara studied the data from Earth with growing fascination. After 3 failed invasions, the Dominion had finally authorized a different approach: understanding the enemy. But what they discovered would shake the foundations of their civilization. Impossible, Kilara chittered, reviewing the environmental data for the 3rd time. No species could evolve under such conditions. The holographic display showed Earth's history, a planet of constant change, where temperatures swung wildly between extremes, where the very continents drifted across the surface, where life had survived multiple extinction events. Unlike the Verax's stable crystalline homeworld, Earth was a chaos engine. They shouldn't exist, Kilara's assistant, Ven, observed. Their planet's magnetic field randomly reverses. Their axis of rotation wobbles. Their single moon creates tidal forces that constantly reshape their planet's surface. Even their position in their star system is hazardous. They're bombarded by radiation, asteroids, and solar fluctuations. But exist they did. More than that, they thrived. The research team had been tasked with understanding why human unpredictability was so effective against Verax technology. What they found instead was the key to humanity's greatest strength. They had evolved in an environment that made unpredictability not just beneficial, but necessary for survival. Look at this. Kilara magnified a section of data. Their brains don't just process information. They actively seek out new patterns, create connections where none exist, and imagine scenarios that have never occurred. They're not just responding to chaos. They're generating it. The Verax had always viewed their own crystalline neural networks as the pinnacle of evolution, perfect, orderly, and precise. But human brains were different. They were messy, inefficient, and constantly changing. They formed new connections, pruned old ones, and operated in ways that defied the Verax's understanding of consciousness. Their entire decision-making process is quantum, Ven realized, mandibles clicking in excitement. While we process information linearly, humans exist in a state of perpetual possibility. They don't just consider the most logical course of action. They simultaneously process countless scenarios, including impossible ones. The implications were staggering. The Verax had spent millennia perfecting their technology, making it more efficient, more predictable. But humans had evolved to be inherently unpredictable, to think in ways that no algorithm could anticipate. As they delved deeper into human psychology, the researchers discovered something even more surprising. Humans didn't just survive chaos. They craved it. Their entertainment, their art, their games all deliberately introduced elements of randomness and uncertainty. They sought out new experiences, challenged their own assumptions, and willingly placed themselves in situations where the outcome was unknown. They're running evolutionary simulations in their minds constantly, Kilara explained to the hastily assembled council. Every human story, every game, every hypothetical scenario they imagine. It's all preparation for dealing with the unexpected. They've turned their entire consciousness into a chaos prediction engine. The council chamber hummed with disquiet. This wasn't just about military strategy anymore. The humans represented something the Verax had never encountered, a species that had evolved to thrive on uncertainty itself. There's more, Kilara continued. Their social structures, what we initially dismissed as primitive and disorganized, are actually incredibly sophisticated adaptation mechanisms. They maintain multiple competing systems simultaneously, different governments, different economies, different cultures. When one system fails, others are ready to take its place. The research revealed that humans had turned their greatest evolutionary challenge, surviving on a chaotic planet, into their greatest advantage. Their technology wasn't primitive, it was purposefully adaptable. Their social structures weren't disorganized. They were deliberately diverse to ensure survival through any crisis. And now, Kilara concluded, they've encountered us, a species that represents perfect order. To them, we're just another chaos problem to solve. And solving chaos problems is what their entire species evolved to do. The implications were clear. The Verax's perfect, crystalline civilization had evolved in an environment of stability and predictability. They had achieved technological supremacy by mastering the patterns of the universe. But humans had evolved in an environment that taught them there were no permanent patterns. That change was the only constant. As the Council absorbed this information, alerts began flooding in from the border monitoring stations. Human ships had been detected, but not approaching in battle formation. They were small vessels, seemingly civilian, broadcasting on open frequencies in multiple languages. They were attempting first contact, not as warriors, but as explorers. "They're adapting again," Kilara observed. "They've learned enough about us to know that military victory isn't their only option. They're offering us a choice: continue fighting against their chaos, or learn to embrace it." The council chamber fell silent as the Verax faced their greatest challenge yet: the possibility that their pursuit of perfection had led them down an evolutionary dead end, while humanity's embracing of imperfection had prepared them for the true nature of the universe. In the grand amphitheater of the United Earth Council, representatives of humanity faced their former enemies across a table made of both crystal and steel, a symbolic fusion of their civilizations. Supreme Commander Ixal, now serving as the Verax diplomatic envoy, stood before the assembled delegates, their crystalline form reflecting the light in ways that seemed less rigid than before. "We came to your world believing we were the pinnacle of evolution," Ixal began, their translated words echoing through the chamber. "We were wrong. You taught us that perfection is not the goal of evolution. Adaptability is." The human delegates listened intently. Among them sat Admiral Chen and Dr. Patel, the architects of Earth's defense, who had proven that creativity could overcome technological superiority. But today wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about understanding. "Our scientists have completed their analysis of Earth's evolutionary history," Ixal continued. "What we found has transformed our understanding of life itself. You see, we evolved on a world of perfect crystal, where patterns repeated with mathematical precision. We thought this made us superior. Instead, it made us vulnerable to something we never expected: the power of chaos itself." Holographic displays activated around the chamber, showing the parallel development of Earth and the Verax homeworld. The contrast was striking: one a world of constant change, the other of eternal stability. "Your planet," Ixal explained, "has faced more extinction-level events in its history than all other known inhabited worlds combined. Your species has survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, and countless other catastrophes. Each disaster didn't weaken you. It made you stronger, more adaptable." Dr. Patel leaned forward. "You're saying Earth is unique not despite its chaos, but because of it." "Precisely. While we spent millennia perfecting our existing patterns, you were forced to constantly create new ones. Your art, your music, your literature, what we once dismissed as primitive noise. These are actually evolutionary tools, ways of preparing your minds for an unpredictable universe." The revelation hit both species with profound impact. The humans had never thought of their creativity as an evolutionary advantage. The Verax had never considered that their pursuit of perfection might be limiting their potential. But the most remarkable discovery, Ixal continued, their voice carrying a note of wonder that the translation couldn't quite capture, is what happened when our civilizations met. We thought we were testing you. Instead, you were testing us." Admiral Chen nodded, understanding dawning. "Every time we faced you, we had to innovate, to think in new ways. But you were forced to do the same, to break out of your perfect patterns. Yes, for the first time in our history, we had to adapt. When our perfect formations failed, when our crystalline computers couldn't predict your strategies, we faced a choice: evolve or become extinct. You forced us to grow beyond our crystalline nature." The amphitheater hummed with conversation as the implications became clear. The conflict between humans and the Verax hadn't just been a war. It had been an evolutionary catalyst for both species. "We propose an alliance," Ixal announced, "not based on military strength or technological superiority, but on complementary evolution. Your chaos and our order working in harmony." The proposal was revolutionary. The Verax offered to share their advanced technology, while humans would teach them the art of creative thinking, of embracing uncertainty. Together, they would face the greater challenges that lurked in the vast unknown of space. "There are threats out there," Ixal warned, "that neither chaos nor order alone can defeat." But together, the crystalline beam's form shifted, displaying colors that no human had seen before, the Verax equivalent of hope. As the human delegates debated the proposal, Dr. Patel approached the table with a curious object, a crystal that seemed to grow and change shape randomly, yet maintained its structural integrity. "We created this while studying your technology," he explained. "It's a hybrid crystalline structure guided by quantum chaos, neither purely ordered nor purely random. We think it represents what our species could achieve together." The Verax gathered around the crystal, their own crystalline forms resonating with it in unexpected ways. For the first time, they saw beauty in imperfection, strength in uncertainty. The vote was unanimous. Human and Verax would unite, combining the relentless adaptability of Earth-born life with the technological mastery of the crystalline civilization. Together, they would explore the galaxy not as conquerors or prey, but as partners in evolution. As the historic session concluded, Admiral Chen turned to Ixal. "You know, there's an old Earth saying, 'What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.'" Ixal's crystalline form shimmered with understanding. "Perhaps that is why your world's challenges created such formidable life. You never broke under pressure. You crystallized into something stronger, yet remained flexible enough to keep changing." The alliance marked the beginning of a new era. The Verax learned to embrace chaos as a source of growth, while humans gained the tools to reach further into space than ever before. Together, they became something new, a civilization that could face any challenge, adapt to any situation, and turn both order and chaos to their advantage. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other civilizations began to take notice. The species they had dismissed as primitive had not only survived, but had transformed their would-be conquerors into allies. Earth was no longer just a cradle of life. It had become an incubator of evolution itself, proving that in the grand cosmic game of survival, adaptability would always triumph over perfection.